on this episode of The Strange Medicine of Alice Strange.
So, it makes sense that there would be this vampiric quality to certain plants. Vampirism is, in the modern sense, is energy work, connecting to the dead, moving energy, transferring energy. So there are plants that kind of have these characteristics that make them a little bit innately vampiric.
And I think shadow work is something that a lot of people overdo. We hear all the time about do shadow work, but not a lot of people talk about how draining it can be.
Yeah, for sure. And so there, plants like rose, which is a really powerful heart healer, is one that's really supportive for shadow work. If the poison plants have kind of taught me anything, it's just that, it's not always what your first perceptions of a person or a situation necessarily are. But if we're willing to understand each other kind of on an individual basis and really like empathize, then we have a lot more in common than we do differences.
Welcome, seekers, to The Strange Medicine of Alice Strange, the podcast where modern science meets with what lies beyond what we can see. Here, we delve into psychology, spirituality, science, and the occult. Each episode will explore the bigger questions of existence, the nature of the soul, our internal world, and how we can understand them through spirituality and magic. This podcast is a sanctuary for the soul. Alongside science and spirituality, we also learn the power of compassion and the magic of extending kindness to others. For in the act of giving, we receive. In the act of teaching, we learn. This is a journey into the depths of the mind as well as the heart, where every lesson is a step toward oneness, every insight a bridge to understanding, and every act of kindness a spell that transforms the world. So join me, Alice Estrella Strange, on this journey of self-discovery, scientific wonders, ancient knowledge, and finding the strange medicine within yourself. Hello, seekers, and welcome to the Strange Medicine of Alice Strange podcast. I'm Alice Estrella Strange, and today we are talking to Coby Michael. Coby Michael is an occult herbalist and magical practitioner who teaches about the ritual use of poisonous and psychoactive plants. He is an author and owns and operates the Poisoner's Apothecary, an online shop and educational resource for those in the poison path. Today we are discussing the Poison Path Grimoire. This book is a practical guide to the magic of the poison path that celebrates the deadly, unwanted, and wild plants of dark herbalism, and explores how to embrace their power in ritual, magical practice, and spiritual healing. But first, if you've never met me before, hi, I'm Alice. I'm a psychic development and spiritual self-development coach, and I help people tap into their spiritual gifts to overcome whatever is holding you back. I believe everyone is capable of great things, and I can help you find empowerment through a deeper spiritual connection. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one to find clarity or guidance for your life, you can find my booking link down in the description, as well as an invitation to join a free community for spiritual individuals to deepen their connection and support each other. And if you like spirituality, psychology, self-development, and learning, make sure you subscribe or follow to take the first steps toward finding empowerment. Take care, love yourself, and remember, you don't have to do it alone. Hello, Coby. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just so happy to have you here.
Hell yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
So would you be so kind as to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So my name is Coby Michael. I'm an author and occult herbalist writing on the topic of the poison path. I run a business called the Poisoner's Apothecary and host the annual Botanica Obscura conference.
I love that. And so I am a really big fan of your book. I have so many little save tabs. I'm just such a big fan. Would you tell us a little bit about this book that you've written?
Yeah, so, excuse me, the Poison Path Grimoire is the second in what I'm calling the Poison Path series, because it seems to be, going to be more than one, obviously, probably three. So this is the second one. It is dark herbalism, poison magic, and baneful allies. So kind of delving into the occult and esoteric side of the poison path and poisonous plants and other herbs that we would consider to have a little bit more of a sinister or dark nature behind them.
I love that. And can you explain a little bit more in detail what the poison path includes? What is that?
It's going to be a little bit different for everybody. But just kind of the most general definition, the poison path is the interest and exploration into the occult and spiritual nature of poisonous plants. We could extend that into mushrooms, animal spirits, any of these archetypal spirits, deities that have this kind of baneful and poisonous connection.
And so I'm sure you get this a lot. I'm sure this question comes up so much. Why poisonous plants? Why poison?
That's a really good question, and I think it kind of feeds into sort of the definition of what the poison path is, or I guess kind of how it started. So it was originally a term that was coined by author Dale Pendle to specifically describe the exploration of plants associated with European witchcraft, being mainly plants in the nightshade family, things like mandrake, belladonna, datura, henbane. However, it branches out and travels all over the world because nightshades are one of the most important, not only like agricultural plants, but also ceremonial plants. So they've got a really um, big importance pretty much anywhere that they're found. So just kind of exploring the connection that they have with the spirit world through their connection to life and death, their association to the practice of witchcraft, and working with plant spirit familiars. Yeah, it's really kind of a big category, so it's hard to really like hone in on one single definition because there's so many different directions and approaches that you can take, and different reasons for being interested in them, whether it's more on the witchcraft side, the magical correspondences, the folk magic, or if you take more of a practical medicinal interest, or looking at them as power plants that can be incorporated into plant medicine ceremonies for healing and transformation.
Beautiful. And how do poison plants relate to herbalism specifically?
Oh, well, in herbalism, medicinal herbalism, clinical herbalism, folk herbalism, they would be considered low dose herbs. So they're kind of under this umbrella of poisonous that makes us think that they don't have any other use other than being deadly and dangerous. However, as low dose herbs in the right contexts and in the right application, they are some of our most important medicines. So with their chemical compounds, they act very powerfully, and can treat a really wide variety of different symptoms, which is going to vary based on the individual plant, but they've led to some of our most important pharmaceutical medications and discoveries as far as like brain chemistry and different neurotransmitters.
I love that. I love the science when it all kind of wraps up together. Is there a specific plant, a specific herb that really got you started on the poison path? Or is there one that's very close to your heart?
The one that got me started was deadly nightshade, which his Latin name is Atropa belladonna. So for me, and I think for a lot of people, that one just kind of embodies like the entire witch archetype. It's deadly nightshade, so it's dangerous, it's deadly, it's got all of these, malefic and sinister and diabolical associations, and the fact that it is, physically dangerous. But then it also has like this very kind of mysterious and seductive side, and connects to a lot of the European witch lore that I'm so interested in. So that was kind of the gateway herb that led me into the poison path. And I think in and of itself, it really represents like a lot of kind of like core ideas and concepts that go along with it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I got started myself working with poisonous plants when I started working with bittersweet American nightshade. And it's such a beautiful plant to look at. And I think that's something that comes up a lot with poisonous plants. They look so seductive, as you said. And I think it's kind of understandable when you work with plants and you understand their energetic side, that there's a lot more than just it being poisonous by definition.
Yeah, and that kind of led into, what the second book is really about, is really exploring like those concepts of poison and how they pop up in mythology and just like human evolution in general, and kind of our understanding of medicine and treatment, disease, and all of these different areas that poison has kind of been like a recurring theme. So it really kind of gives you an idea of the intricacy of the energy that you're tapping into when you talk about poison.
So you do talk a lot in your book about the shadow work piece, and I love the your take on shadow work. There's so many beautiful quotes to take from this book. How do you think poison plants are best used for shadow work and things like that?
Yeah, so the Poison Path Grimoire is very much kind of focused on shadow work and just sort of this idea of dark herbalism, of using the different qualities and characteristics of certain plants that fall into that category as a means for empowerment and transformation. So in the case of poisonous plants, they are chemically potent. So they've got this really powerful potential. So energetically and spiritually, they act as really powerful catalysts for change and for transformation. And just through their association with kind of the collective shadow, things that we are afraid of, the theme of death, the underworld, all of these different things that tend to come up when we're doing shadow work and we're working on some of our own personal healing. It usually touches on a lot of those things like fear and anger, anxiety, unhealthy attachments, unhealthy boundaries. So the poisonous plants just really step forward as really powerful healing allies that can offer a lot of wisdom when we partner with them, going through shadow work, because they're literally from the shadow. So what better way to kind of begin to unravel and understand our own shadows than to partner with these spiritual allies that actually come from that realm?
Absolutely. I think with the energies in a poisonous plant, the things like everything you write about is it lends itself very well to shadow work. And I really do love everything you wrote in your book about shadow work as a concept. It was quite moving for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of, my own personal story kind of woven in through there. Sometimes more explicitly, other times it's a little bit more subtle, but just a lot of like personal feelings and emotions and my own experiences that kind of come through when I'm talking about all of this. So the second book really kind of rose out of a very, I guess you could say, dark and transitional period after the first book came out. But I feel like that's kind of a regular theme for me, where I'm constantly going through these, death and decay experiences and resurrecting in some way.
Yeah, I think life is kind of exciting when you live it that way. Sometimes intimidating and scary, but very moving.
For sure.
And so, could you tell us a little bit about your previous book? Because I've read this one and I ran out and bought the other one and I haven't dove into it yet, but I would love to hear a little bit about this first book that you wrote.
Yeah, so the first one is called The Poison Path Herbal, Ritual Entheogens, Medicinal Nightshades, and Baneful Herbs. I didn't choose the titles, the whole Poison Path Herbal, Poison Path Grimoire. That was kind of guess you could call it the publicity department. Of course, I had like a little bit of a say in it, but I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna slap the poison path on this and make it mine. So the first one was really me trying to kind of create the book that I wished that I had when I started all of this. So it goes into a lot of the kind of foundational information when it comes to beginning on the poison path, covering not only the spiritual and esoteric side of it, but also looking into the more practical scientific side when it comes to working with these plants. So their proper preparation, their dosages, different dosing thresholds, precedents for medicinal application, just to give people a better sense of how they can be safely incorporated into magical practice or made into even like therapeutic preparations. Because, for a good reason, unless you're like a clinical herbalist kind of specializing in low dose herbs, it's not like making a folk tincture where you just put a bunch of plant material into a jar and cover it with alcohol and you're done. Like there's a little bit more that goes into it. So just trying to kind of provide a basis for people to go off of for their own exploration, kind of pointing out some of the different spiritual connections that can be found there, which is like largely individualistic, just kind of based on the plant's folklore, mythology, and any existing magical correspondences floating around out there.
Beautiful. And something you mention a lot in your book is Saturnian energy. And I would love for you to give a little explanation of how that relates to the poison path.
So poisonous plants are typically and traditionally placed under the rulership of Saturn when it comes to their medicinal properties. So each plant has a planetary association based on what it does, what its appearance is, and we can draw from that a lot of sort of magical material to work with. So the medicinal, the chemical side always translates into the magical side and kind of vice versa. So poisonous plants being under the rulership of Saturn, simply because they're capable of killing you, causing harm, but also a lot of them are sedative or soporific, so they induce sleep. So kind of associated with like that slowing down, which is a very Saturnian energy, that melancholy. They're also plants that could be, good for the skeletal system, the connective tissue, the skin. So not just limited to poisonous plants. There's a lot of others that kind of fall under the Saturnian category. But for me and I hate to call it a tradition, but the way that I practice and the things that have kind of collected around that practice, ideas of Saturn being associated with the witch father or the horned god, or sort of the quote masculine side of divinity. So the folkloric devil. So we get into a lot of like transgressive themes and things involving like the witch's sabbat and just kind of that more traditional or archetypal witchcraft energy that manifests through the figure and energy of Saturn.
Lovely, lovely. And another thing you mentioned in your book is vampiric energy, vampiric herbalism. And I would love for you to give a little snippet of what that's about because I found this fascinating. I don't see this written anywhere else that I've experienced. So I would love for you to share.
Yay, I'm glad you mentioned that.
It was my favorite part.
Good, good. I was hoping it would kind of come through that way because it is a little bit different and not something that you like read too much about. So for me personally, like I've always had an interest in witchcraft and magical practice, but then I've also had like this vampiric interest on the other side over here. And looking at a lot of the characteristics of the vampire, much in the same way that we do like the characteristics of the witch and what we can draw from that sort of in our own manifestation of those energies. So when it comes to herbs, we're always talking about their energetics, their planetary correspondences, their elemental correspondences, just the way that they influence the body energetically. So, it makes sense that there would be this vampiric quality to certain plants as well, because a lot of what vampirism is, in the modern sense, is energy work, connecting to the dead, moving energy, transferring energy. So there are plants that kind of have these characteristics that make them a little bit innately vampiric, I guess. So these would be plants like rose, bramble, blackthorn, a lot of plants that we see in folk medicine practices being used in transference magic to draw off disease or, transfer a disease or an injury or pain to a specific plant that has these qualities. So kind of investigating that idea and how that can be incorporated into magic. And then when we think about like the pop culture vampire, as it evolved from the folkloric vampire, is now like this glamorous, sexy, kind of seductive thing. So there's a lot of glamour magic peppered in there, and influence magic or domination magic that we could call it.
Yes, I think that section was so fascinating to me. And there's actually a lot of practical uses for it, which I was very surprised, but I loved it very much.
Cool. Yeah, I think you could write a whole book just on that topic of plants that kind of fit into that realm.
Yeah, oh man, would I buy that book? That's very true. And something you mentioned toward the end of your book is balancing your practice between poisonous plants and healing plants. And I thought this was a really fascinating and important thing to share. And so would you be interested in sharing about that with our audience?
Yeah, I thought that was something that was important to touch on and kind of share with people, just through my own experience. The poisonous plants do have their own very unique energy. Not to characterize them as like malicious or like intentionally harmful, but there is like a lot of baggage kind of associated with them, based on characteristics that we've given them or ways that we've used them or abused them, ways that they kind of connect to our own collective shadow. So that kind of carries with it its own sort of energy. And when we do shadow work and kind of delve into those shadow realms, we pick up a lot of that energy and start to kind of incorporate it into our own energy body, which can leave us feeling like depressed, drained. Um, some may say that we've been vampirized. um, they just have a certain heaviness sometimes. I think if we delve, too far into that without having more of the light side plant allies to help kind of bring us out. Um, and that's going to be like important with any kind of plant medicine ceremony, healing process, or shadow work, is having these other supportive allies, the more, I guess, like benign or balm type plants that can, help to heal the wounds and strengthen us and kind of bring us back to where we need to be.
And I think shadow work is something that a lot of people overdo. We hear all the time about do shadow work, but not a lot of people talk about how draining it can be. You can't overdo it.
Yeah, for sure. And so there, plants like rose, which is a really powerful heart healer, is one that's really supportive for shadow work, just kind of opening the heart, but still keeping it protected, when we're in like this vulnerable newborn baby kind of stage and integrating a lot of these changes, like it can be really easy, um, to cause like further damage or to kind of get thrown back into the place that you just dug yourself out of, if you're not supporting yourself in different ways. And then the nightshades, the poisonous plants are very supportive and healing too. but I just think that it's important to kind of incorporate that balance.
Yes, balance is so important. And I would be interested in a story, if you'd be willing to share a story that about a plant that really stuck with you, something that just kind of sticks with you to this day. I'm sure you just have so many.
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of them. Um, so like Deadly Nightshade was kind of the one that begun the journey and held my hand through a lot of the processes that I went through with that. But just kind of like touching on the importance of balance. Another one that came through a little bit later was Foxglove digitalis. So it is still a poisonous plant, but it's one that I kind of characterize as one of the kinder or more jovial spirits from the poison garden, and that might have to do like with its association with fairy lore and just like its appearance, you know, big pink beautiful bells. So it just has like a gentler look, I guess, than like Datura stramonium or Deadly Nightshade, which, you know, very, very Saturnian. But Foxglove has a lot of the Venusian elements as well. It's also really supportive for shadow work, specifically because of its effect on the energetic heart. So heart healing, but also like rebalancing and opening the heart center, allowing us to feel self-love and express love in healthy ways and things like that. So the foxglove plant was one that I was never super interested in personally when I first started out. It's like, give me the deadly nightshade, give me the wolf's bane, give me the poison hemlock. Um, I mean, foxglove can definitely kill you too. It has cardiac glycosides in it that can stop your heart. But yeah, it was just one that didn't really draw me in initially. It was some of the more vicious ones, I guess, that I was more attracted to, which kind of makes sense now looking back on some of the processes that I was going through. But then I got to, you know, a different place, and the foxglove plant came forward. I had the living plant here in my living space, and I was doing a mushroom ceremony, and I decided to bring the plant and make it like part of the altar. So I always set up like a plant ceremony altar as kind of like the central focal point of the ceremony. So I just remember going through that whole process and being in the ceremony, and then all of a sudden, like my attention kind of being drawn to the foxglove plant. Uh, and I just felt like this really like loving kindred connection, and wanted to like sit really close to the plant and was just like touching its leaves and talking to it and just being very gentle with it. And it just almost felt like I felt like this intense need to like repay or recognize like this sacrifice almost that had been made by the plant. So it was almost like it was coming forward and just being like, hey, like I've been here. You might not have noticed, but I've been like a really big part of this process for you. And, you know, all of that kind of relating to like self-love and just heart and emotional related issues and things like that. So that was just like a really nice, warm and fuzzy experience that I had with a poisonous plant.
I love that. And I think there is a lot of duality in a lot of these plants where they are deadly in ways, but they are so healing, both on the herbalism and the magical side.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you do get like totally different reactions depending on who you talk to. Like some people are just like complete like fear-based reaction, almost like they get angry about it and just don't want to have like anything to do with it. And then you've got the people that are just like very interested and fascinated. You know, so I'm one of those interested and fascinated people. Like I think that the fact that they're poisonous is really interesting, and the ways that they can potentially kill you is interesting. You know, the dark and occult side of it is all very interesting. But then on the other hand, when I connect to their spirits and, I see them every day and I'm looking at them right now and I spend so much time with them, like you really start to get a sense for like this gentler side that they have.
Yeah, sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper, a little under the
Mhm.
surface to find it. So you mentioned in your book the energy of Venus being very dualistic, and I don't hear that talked about a lot. Would you be willing to share how that is and how it relates to the plants you work with?
So the Venusian association is something that seems to pop up when it comes to especially plants in the nightshade family, along with the Saturnian properties. So we've got the fact that they're also aphrodisiac. So mandrake has been used as a fertility charm, since probably before the Old Testament was written. Henbane is also known for its aphrodisiac properties, and is still, up until today, made into an aphrodisiac massage oil, basically, specifically in Germany and Europe. Then we've got Datura, which is connected to aphrodisiacs, maybe like on the other end of the spectrum. So, in Mexico in particular, it's called toloache, the Datura inoxia, and it's used in different formulas for its aphrodisiac properties, but specifically for love magic. So that could be to increase somebody's virility or their sexual prowess. But then it's also used in some formulas for more manipulative love magic. So it can cause a person to become infatuated. It can, bind a lover to keep them from straying. It can also be used sort of as an anaphrodisiac in the opposite fashion. So if you've got somebody that's out, cheating on you and running around, the datura plant is used to kind of bind them and bring them back to you and sort of bind that nature in them so that they don't go out and do that anymore. So lots of these sort of Venusian properties that pop up. But Venus as sort of a spirit or an energy, we typically talk about, Venus as being like goddess of love, goddess of gardens, goddess of beauty and nice things. But she's also got a darker side. Uh, and I think that kind of manifests in her role as the witch queen. So this very like sexually liberated, empowered, these different qualities that are kind of like looked down upon or sort of go against like the patriarchal narrative of this feminine empowerment, which would resonate with a lot of people, regardless of if you identify as female or not, sort of this transgressive and, going against the status quo kind of idea. So that manifests through the imagery and archetype of the witch herself.
And there are so many archetypes, so many different goddesses and gods that you mention in your book. Are these figures that came up for you after you started working with the plants and you were writing your book, or were some of them there before?
So some of them were more traditional or historic associations. Some of them come from a little bit more modern, so other practitioners associations. We can also look at like the common names for plants in different parts of the world will often give us clues to their pre-Christian spiritual associations. Um, so kind of pulling from all of these different areas. But the reason that I present so many different deities and spirits and figures from different parts of the world or different points in history is just to give people kind of an idea of like how I perceive the energies and how I connect them. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was like a cult worshiping the goddess Freya that was consuming deadly nightshade because that's connected to that deity or whatever. But looking at the similarities between the different energies and associations and how we can kind of incorporate those.
And I loved your section on the Latin names and relating them back to like Greek mythology and all of these other things. That was so fascinating. And goodness, I ate that up. I ate that up. It was beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot of, pre-Christian lore that kind of got lost or, was never written down because some of the people were, not, they were oral traditions, so they weren't writing things down to begin with and have been Christianized for such a long time that a lot of the oral traditions and stories and folklore kind of get lost and forgotten just in the expanse of time. But when we look at some of the Latin names, the German names, the French names, we can pick out little bits and pieces that kind of like harken back to these older ideas and associations that go along with them.
And so if someone was interested in pursuing the poison path, where should they start?
Well, I get asked this question a lot, and I feel like it's a really good question. It's like, where do you start? Where do you start with anything? Just start with wherever you're at. Start with whatever calls out to you. I think it's important to kind of, sit and think like, what is it about the poison path that even is interesting? Is it the connection to witchcraft? Is it the medicinal properties? Is it the um, use of them as plant spirit medicine or plant spirit familiars and kind of go off from there? Because there's a lot of like poison path lore that's kind of breadcrumbs throughout like a lot of sources that you wouldn't typically associate with being connected to the poison path. I think that my books are a good place to start, and present a lot of different perspectives and give people kind of different points of inspiration to go from. So depending on what tradition you're working in, or what deities are in the pantheon that you work with, or all of these different things are potential places that you can kind of start as like points for your own personal inspiration. Definitely growing them is great, but then also kind of like trying to just identify plants in your own backyard or wherever you live. There's a lot of poisonous plants out there. um, a lot of plants that we could consider like ornamentals or house plants or garden plants like are super toxic, and it's probably one of the reasons why we grow them as house plants, because we can't eat them.
It's a good point. And what warnings would you give to someone who wanted to start the poison path?
Um, well, first of all, don't put things in your mouth. That's always a good rule of thumb. Um, I don't know. I think a lot of people get caught up in the entheogenic side of poisonous plants. So entheogen being an herb or a mushroom or a substance that creates an altered state of consciousness in order to facilitate a spiritual experience. So it means to connect with the divine within. So it helps us touch that part of ourselves that is connected to the divine, the spirit world, whatever we want to call it. They kind of want to repackage that into what looks like sort of modern, I don't even know, not modern, plant medicine in general. So plant medicine is something that is very popular, and there are a lot of plant medicine tourists out there and people that just want to try different things. And there's not anything wrong with seeking things out and trying to figure out your own healing process, but equating them to things like magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro, all of these different psychoactive plants and fungi, that have existing traditions built around them. That's kind of a lot of people's point of association, or how to kind of approach working with these as well. And I think that it's kind of easy to get hung up on that. And I think that poisonous plants present us with an opportunity, within the fact that they are potentially dangerous and deadly, to explore some of the more spiritual and energetic sides when it comes to plant communication and healing through plant medicine, versus not everything has to be eaten and consumed. Not everything has to make us trip, for lack of a better word. There's many other ways to engage in a relationship with the plant spirit that's going to have, a lot of the same, or its own individual kind of benefits. So just holding space for both of those things and the parallels that they have, but also kind of recognizing that they are two sort of separate things.
I think that's important. That's important to know. I think people can get some people get dependent on those things, or they get stuck in that cycle. And it's good to know before you go in that that's a possibility, and to just be aware. It's good advice.
Yeah, and you just get a lot of people that find you, and it's like, oh, hey, bro, I ate like 1,000 morning glory seeds, or chewing on datura pods, and just like crazy, just not great situations that come from kind of that corner of the world.
Yeah. And I guess to finish us off, I will ask you the question I ask all of my guests. If you could choose to leave behind any legacy in this world, what legacy would you choose to leave behind?
Oh, oh, that's a good one. That makes my heart
I know, I love this question.
do things. The legacy I would like to leave. I don't know. I don't want people to be afraid. I don't want people to feel alone. I know that that is unavoidable most of the time, but just like the understanding that healing is not always pretty. Not everybody is perfect, and I would say that 99.999% of the people that we see, that seem to have it all together and are kind of like up on these pedestals, like everybody's dealing with something, everybody's going through something. And I think that the most important thing is just like coming together and supporting each other. And if the poison plants have kind of taught me anything, it's just that it's not always what your first perceptions of a person or a situation necessarily are. But if we're willing to understand each other kind of on an individual basis, and really like empathize, then we have a lot more in common than we do differences. I don't know if that's really a legacy. That's more like,
I love it though. I resonate with that so deeply. I'm here for it.
Inspirational talk.
And so if people are interested in finding you online and checking out what you do, where can they go to find that?
You can follow me on social media at Poisoner's Apothecary. You can also visit my website, thepoisonersapothecary.com. And if you're interested in plants, plant magic, and plant-based spirituality, you can attend the Botanica Obscura conference, which is held virtually every March. The website for that is botanicaobscuraconference.com.
Lovely. Thank you so much for coming and being on my show today. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you found wisdom in this interview, comment below what you've taken away from this, and be sure to subscribe to take the first steps toward deepening your practice. And if you're listening to this podcast outside of YouTube, be sure to check out my channel where I post insider tips to finding empowerment through witchcraft that don't make it to the podcast. And until next time, be well, be kind, and may your curiosity for this world and the next never fade.